hope that your seders are wonderful and pleasant. Marc, what are you cooking tonight? What are you
Well,
going to be serving tonight? I know you have some wonderful family recipes.
yeah, I mean, look, the recipe for Seder, people have to remember this. We think that the iconic recipe is gefilte is chicken soup, most matzo balls, gefilte fish, brisket, chicken, and hummus and potato kugel. And
And then prunes and apricots.
yeah,
Because after eating matzah, well,
yeah. But that isn't actually the traditional meal. That's only the traditional meal for European Jews, which is most of us, but not for all Jews. So, and in fact, there's been an increasing um, popularity for Persian Jewish charoset, because their charoset isn't just some, Manischewitz wine, apples, and walnuts. It's like 10, 15, 20 ingredients.
oh, it's magnificent. It's unbelievable. It's dates and it's got cardamom in it, and it is a beautiful, beautiful flavor.
It's floral. It's amazing. So what's wonderful now is that the Sephardic and the Ashkenazic world are kind of intermingling, and their food traditions are intermingling. But the iconic Ashkenazi menu is actually from rabbinic ordination. They required that menu in Europe, and that was the same reason they required it. It's the same menu for Shabbos. And the reason is Oneg Shabbos. The idea, so the rabbis, what does it mean to have Oneg Shabbos? And they would go through the joy of Shabbos. They'd say, well, first of all, it means you have to eat every kind of food. That's part of the Oneg. And what is every kind of food? It's fish, which is the gefilte fish. It's fowl, which is the chicken soup. And then it's beef. It's the brisket. So fish, fowl, and beef were the luxury foods of the Middle Ages, and that's why it was ordained. And the rabbis even collected money and distributed money to congregants so that they should have Oneg Shabbos, which meant enough money to buy all the foods they needed. I am, among the many things my little cynical heart bemoans about the changes in modern civilization, or as T.H. Lawrence called it, the bad weather of modern civilization. One is the disappearance of gefilte fish. Eddie, I love you dearly and deeply, but if you tell me that you no longer have gefilte fish at your Seder, you're not my friend anymore. And I can tell you.
But the irony of gefilte fish, of course, is, but it's an irony because we ate gefilte fish because we were poor.
Yes.
So you'd buy a skinny little fish, a pike, and you'd hollow it out, carp. You'd hollow it out, mix it with enough breadcrumbs to stretch it so that the whole family could taste it, and then stuff it back into fish. Now that we could eat, now that we're rich and we could eat whatever we want.
Whitefish and pike.
Salmon,
Pike. No, the classic combo for high level traditional gefilte fish is whitefish, carp, and pike. And that's so you mix it together with all that. But anyway, I used to, and then there's hummus, which is one of my favorite dishes because it's a melange of vegetables cooked until they say, I'm dead, I give up. That's when you know that, and it's carrots and it's prunes. And my recipe this year has in it dried apples and cranberries. So there's some really interesting developments in the hummus world. I'm trying to do a potato kugel that has something that tastes more than like you're eating a pound of cement. It has to have some lightness to it.
Now, don't make fun of my mother's cooking now. Cut it out.
I know, I know. And so that's it. And I'm sad because every year I would take my congregation to the Lower East Side. We should share some memories of the Lower East Side in memory of the coming Seder. And I was close to Jack Streitz, the grandson of the founder of Streitz Matzah, and he would let me in. I was the only non-employee, as far as I know, allowed into the Streitz Matzah factory on Rivington Street with a group. And I would take my congregants there. We'd go to Streitz Matzah and Shapiro's Winery and Wolsk dried fruit. And we would go to Ratner's vegetarian restaurant for lunch. And these and at the time we did it a couple of weeks before Pesach, there was a Schreiber, a guy would grind horseradish root, and the fumes were so pungent he couldn't do it anywhere inside any building at all. I think there might have been a zoning law against it because it was like sulfuric acid. So the only place he could grind his grain for the people who wanted it for their Seder, the real stuff, was on the corner of Rivington and I think it was Essex. So he was out there grinding grain and we would get it. And you know, my bitter little joke would be, oh, here, just smell it, see what you think.
Oh,
and then boom,
boom.
Your nasal passages would get incinerated. But
nuclear.
Basically, grain, which I eat both with brisket and gefilte fish, but it's traditionally with gefilte fish. Grain is just grated horseradish root and vinegar. And then, of course, certain Jews, Hungarian Jews particularly, would add sugar. So that's all there was in it. And the beets and beet juice, which made it red, really didn't change the taste at all. But they, so there's the red horseradish and the white horseradish, red grain and white grain. And I would do that. And then there was the biggest candy store in New York was Economy Candy, right there also on Rivington at the other side. And we would go there and I would ask people to pick out a candy bar from their childhood because they had all of them there. Frankly, I think that they were bought back in the 1920s and they were still in the original boxes from the 1920s. But we'd go in there and my pick, which wasn't kosher for Pesach, but it was before Pesach, so was mallow cups, which I would get, of course, in addition to his best thing, which was his challah, big mounds of challah, either marble or vanilla. And the mallow cups were a chocolate cup with marshmallow filling and like a Reese's peanut butter cup, but with marshmallow inside. And we would go to Streitz Matzah Factory and he would give us matzahs right out of the oven, which there's nothing that can redeem matzah. Let's face it. It's water and flour. That's it.
Halachma anya. It's supposed to be poor people's bread, right?
Exactly right. But if you have matzah from the Streitz matzah oven that was baking 2 minutes ago and it's still hot in your hand, it's delicious. It's delicious. And he used to give me, he would bake shmura matzahs. He never sold one package of shmuras, as far as I could tell. He gave them to the Roshei Yeshivas of Manhattan and New York, all over New Jersey and Muncie. And the only ones they would eat, Moshe Tendler, my friend, was the Rosh Yeshiva at YU, Yeshiva University. So all he would eat was, for all of Pesach, was Streitz shmura matzahs. Now, for people who are listening who don't know what a shmura matzah is, you understand that a cracker is made of the same stuff as a matzah, water and flour. And a cracker is not kosher for Passover. A matzah is. Why? And the answer came from the rabbis, which was that chametz which is natural yeast, because they didn't have the powdered stuff, natural yeast, develops after 18 minutes. Where they got this idea, I have no idea. But they had this idea that if you mix water and flour, that's how you make a sourdough starter. You just mix flour and water, let it sit around, and eventually the bacteria in the air ferment in this little starter. My daughter Mara and her husband Sai are really avid bakers, and they have a sourdough starter that's now several years old, and they use it for all their breads. So anyway, they said after 18 minutes, that water and flour are mixed, it's now chametz. Well, okay, so that's why matzahs are kosher, because they're baked faster than 18 minutes, which means no chametz had a chance to develop. All right, that's fine. That's what a matzah is. Everybody kind of gets that. But a shmura matzah is a guarded matzah, a protected matzah, which means some yeshiva guy probably asked, Rabbi, but what happens after they cut the wheat in the field? The farmer cuts the wheat for the flour, and it's sitting there cut. It's no longer an actual growing plant. And what if it rains on the wheat in the field? And the rabbi says, well, then it's chametz after 18 minutes in the field. So shmura matzah Strites would contract with wheat growers who would cut the wheat only on a dry day and immediately harvest it and immediately take it inside. And then the bright yeshiva kid says, okay, what happens after they make the flour? And they put the flour in these bags. And what if they're sitting on the loading dock and it rains and the rain hits the flour bag, which is semi-porous? And they said, oh, after 18 minutes, it's chametz. You can't have it for Pesach. And so the shmura matzah bags of flour were kept inside also. And then the bright yeshiva guy says, well, but what happens, Rabbi, if they bake it together, they mix it, and they put it in the oven, and what if some dough attaches to the rollers or to the rolling pin? And so when you're rolling the next batch, a little of the dough from the previous batch maybe gets mixed in. So, chametz, you can't have it for Pesach. So what do they do for the rolling of the matzah for strites, for shmura matzahs, which they only bake one day a year? They would roll it out, make the matzahs, and then turn off the oven. And they would go with a toothbrush. Eddie, they went with a toothbrush over all the gears and all the rollers and everything, rubbing and scouring and cleaning and muching with this thing to make sure that there was nothing with nothing, and then an air hose to blow away all the little things. And then they would bake it, and that was shmura matzah. Some people say, and it's much more expensive, and some people say, it's not worth it. I'm telling you, shmura matzah tastes better, it is better, and unfortunately, this is one of the years when I can't get my hands on the Strites shmura matzahs, and I'll have to make do with Strites regular Pesach matzahs. But we would go there, and the other thing people don't realize about matzahs, up in the factory on Rivington, up when they mixed the flour and the water, and they made the dough, they would take out a challah. They would take out a piece of the dough, which you have to do when you bake challah, and they would throw it into the oven to burn. Or in that case, what they did is they threw it into a wastebasket, and you say l'hafrish challah. You say there's a bracha, and that bracha made the whole batch kosher. So that's why, when Manischewitz got bought by Borden's or whoever bought them, I don't remember. There was a lot of talk among the yeshivish community. Well, are they going to do all that? Or are they going to free challah on it? Are they going to make it really kosher? So the only matzah that real Jews eat, and I am here to advertise their company. I get no commission on this at all, but I love them deeply and dearly. And thank Jack, may his memory be blessed, Zichrono Livracha, for making the best family-owned matzah in the universe. And those are my Lower East Side food stories. You had one.
Yeah, we moved to New York in 1978. Nina and I were both Californians who grew up here, went to Israel to study and came back to New York to continue our seminary studies. And we're living near the Jewish Theological Seminary on the Upper West Side near Columbia, Morningside Heights. And Nina's parents were coming for Pesach. They were coming to spend Pesach with us. Now, we had, at that time, she was living in one apartment. I was living in another. We weren't married yet. So each of us had bachelor apartments. So each of us had, I had no silverware that didn't say American Airlines on it, put it that way, right? And mom and dad are coming, and we need to make Pesach. And then as we realized that mom and dad are coming, going to get a bunch of other people that were strays, all the people that couldn't go home to New Jersey or Connecticut or someplace for Pesach. Everybody wanted to get together and have Pesach. We needed dishes. We needed Pesach dishes. So somebody said, go to the Lower East Side. There are these places there you can buy Pesach dishes. And somebody gave me the name of a place. So Nina and I take the subway. You take the number 1 train to the D train to the F train. You go downtown. You get off at East Broadway and Essex, and you walk up the street. And there's a giant. It's a giant building with a tiny little storefront called the New York Trading Company. And you walk in this place, humongous place, warehouse-sized place, filled with everything you can imagine: appliances, furniture, housewares, all kinds of and it's all over the damn place. So salesman comes over, a gentleman comes over, he says, what can I do for you kids? I say, well, we're having we didn't know, guys Jewish, guys not Jewish, we're having some people coming over. We're looking for some dishes. We're students. We don't have a lot of money. And he says, hang on a minute. He turns around and he screams, Mama! And this little lady comes out, says, okay, Bubba, what do you want? And I figure, oh, this one I could work. I said, my mother and father are coming from LA to spend Pesach with us. We need a set of Pesach dishes. She said, you need Pesach dishes, huh? How much you got to spend? I said, I'm sorry, but I got $100. Okay, Juan. She calls out Juan. This tremendous guy comes out, and she yells at him at something. I don't know what language she's speaking to him, Hungarian, Romanian. It wasn't anything I spoke. Juan goes downstairs to the basement, comes up with a humongous box. It's marked made in Poland. She says, this is what you want, $100 Pesach dishes. Have a good yontif. So we paid Juan. We pay the lady $100. They wrap it in string, and give me a handle. So now I'm carrying like 500 pounds of Pesach dishes up the F train, up the D train, across the platform to the number 1 train, get off on 116th Street, walk up to 121st Street, take the elevator up to the 3rd floor where we live, open it up. Polish China. Service for 12.
Oh my God.
Including serving platters and creamers and the thing. It's a whole house full of dishes for $100. And would you know it? They're still our dishes. We still use them Pesach, and we tell the story every year. That's our Pesach story. That's our Pesach story. The Lower East Side was a very interesting, but we were there in the 70s, the late 70s. It was just at its very last moment. They had sold the Forward building to a Chinese newspaper. The garden cafeteria was there where you could get a piece of gefilte fish the size of the size of
a Chinese restaurant.
Now, yeah, but it was a beautiful old place. And you could feel, used to go there and have a coffee and a piece of gefilte fish and a piece of rye toast. And you could feel that here's where all the Marxist socialist writers would sit and argue. The Yiddishists would sit and argue. And the bookstores were still there, right? Rabinowitz was there, and Skullcap was his MJ Skullcap, the place I bought my Gemara. It was a remarkable, it was just the very last moments of that neighborhood when we were there, and you could still feel what it once was, but it was an echo of what it what it once was.
And the Elder Street Synagogue, I knew it before Joe. I would go there with my people before Joe Papp got all the money and redid it. And, and now it's this place where wealthy yuppies go to have their weddings.
Mm.
It's like a wedding place. And downstairs they had a little minion that was me. But I loved it. My father would fill me with stories when I was young about the Lower East Side because Dad was an architect and he went to NYU Architecture School, which was down in the Village. And so he would tell me about the dairy restaurants and about all of the places down there, and Jonas Schimmel's Knisherei, Russ and Daughters, Katz's pastrami. And so when I finally came to New York from Evanston, from Northwestern, when I came there, it was like Willy Wonka, Velvel Wonka and his matzo factory. That's what it was for me. And I was filled with my father's old stories. And you're exactly right, Eddie. It was a memory, like the ghosts of the old days were there. You go down to Shapiro's winery in the basement, where they no longer made wine, but they still had the big casks. And they had photographs from Jacob Riis on the wall where, some guy had rented a place to sleep in the coal bin in the basement of a tenement so he could save money and send it back to Poland or Russia or Lithuania to bring the family over. And the people there, when they knew you, it was like you were part of a community. And some of it was not so upright, Eddie. Ratner's Mayor Lansky used to hang out there. And when they were transitioning Ratner's from the dairy restaurant that it was to whatever they were trying to do with it, they made a steakhouse called Meyer Lansky Steakhouse in the back. And that didn't work out too well. But and they had the onion rolls and the pumpernickel. And people also, this is another Jewish food thing that most people are unaware of. The nexus between Jewish restaurants and halacha. So everyone knows that there were dairy restaurants in New York, right? Everyone knows they were Jewish. You go there, there's no meat there. And it's all milchik. It's all milk. And so the question is, why were these Jewish places? And the answer was that if you went by halacha, and you went for lunch, you're working on the Lower East Side and whatever you're working at, and you went for lunch and you had cholov for lunch, by the time you got home for dinner, you could eat basar, you could eat meat. If it was a reverse and you had meat for lunch, you couldn't eat until much later when you couldn't have milk dishes until much later in the night. So that's why the dairy restaurant was a Jewish institution. Plus, and you have to remember, this was an age when nobody ate meat 3 times a day. Nobody ate meat twice a day. If they ate meat once a day, they were rich. And most of them ate meat on Shabbos, and that was it. And so, that was the origin of the dairy restaurants. But in the end, who wants to eat high cholesterol dairy? It didn't have an audience. It didn't have anyone who could appreciate their borscht. I mean, just borscht. We could do a whole day on borscht. But the fact is, I'm a foodie. I'm a Jew. I'm a rabbi. And all those things come together on Pesach. I can't even separate, which is which is my food memories of Pesach and which are my theological memories of Pesach. They're just all mixed together. And, around the Seder table, Eddie, did you have to prove that you could argue? Because that was also how I got good at arguing. Around the Seder table, with my cousin Jeff and others, who was my age, we would always argue about something. And the older uncles and aunts, they would argue, and we would all, and if you could hold your own in the argument of the Gellman family, you had arrived. You had arrived.
Yeah, I wasn't able to argue. I'll tell you why. Because my grandmother was one of five.
Yeah.
Her father, my great grandfather, was a Rav. He was a scholar. They moved from Lithuania to Winnipeg, and from Winnipeg to Kenosha, Wisconsin. And my grandmother sold rags to the farmers and supported the family while he sat and learned. So they had five kids. Okay. My two uncles became rabbis, Jewish. One was a great rabbi in Chicago. One was a Rosh Yeshiva here in LA. Actually ran a kollel here in LA. My bubby was a Zionist. My Aunt Rosie was a capitalist. My Aunt Bessie was a flapper, right? And it was another one, six of them. And Aunt Sarah, Sarah was a union organizer and a communist,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And this was the Jewish 20th century. My family, they couldn't stand each other. They hated each other. I mean, they loved each other, but it was this kind of a Jewish. And my mother was the other side of the family. My mother, she'd invite them all to the Seder, and they would all sit together, and they'd glower at each other, right? Because they had a lifetime of rivalries. And we would as I got old enough, my brothers and I would say, Bubby, why are you so angry at Aunt Rosie? Don't ask, which was her way of saying, I forgot. Something was said, something was borrowed, something wasn't paid for, and it wasn't, and they're angry at each other, and they would sit there and they would glower at each other, and that was our family. And so what we would do to my brothers and I, as we got older, is we would say to each of them, tell us the stories. My brother Simi, who's a scholar, started recording these. He brought a tape recorder to the table, and he said to Aunt Sarah, tell us the story of unions on the Lower East Side. She was working in a cheese factory and was part of the team that organized the union in the cheese factory, and got beat up by the Pinkertons in Union Square, in Lower Manhattan. Aunt Bessie comes to LA. She was the first, or Aunt Rosie was the first one to come to LA, buy up property in Beverly Hills when it was still just a farm. And she bought up all of these lots and became ridiculously wealthy. This was what it was. It was a wonderful family and they breathed Jewish history. They all spoke with accents. The English wasn't very good, but they all had this background. Aunt Sarah, and Sarah would bring stuff. She'd find stuff in rummage sales and say, "It'll fit you. Look." But this was the family. It was a remarkable historical experience to sit at the table and listen to their stories about how they came to America and how they found their place in America.
That is so beautiful. And
those are my Seder memories.
When you think about it, Eddie, without the Seder, that bond would not exist. When else would they get together other than the Seder? Never. That was it.
There?
Without the Seder, there would this bond that you described so lovingly about your family would not exist.
Right.
The only time your family and my family and any Jewish family, especially ones with ideological differences, which was all of us, the only time we got together was the Seder. It was the only time.
Wonderful.
And so when you look at the impact of the Seder meal, it's transformative. It's the glue. It's the glue that keeps us together. And that is why I believe in my heart that it's the last Jewish ritual to die. I mean, in the survey you cited last week that the most common Jewish ritual is Hanukkah presents, but that's nothing with nothing. The second most common is the Seder. It's up in the 90% range. And even though the Seders that a lot of people have are unrecognizable, would be unrecognizable to the rabbis, and even among good Sedarim, the number that have something that continues afterwards, the second part that you beautifully described as the Pesach Latid, there aren't that many that have it after the meal. But even so, with all those limitations, the Seder is still essential. It's marvelous. It's binding. It's theologically rich. You know, in the winter, when we go up against the Christians with Hanukkah against Christmas, you know, and I've fetched about it forever, how we lose. Their music is better, the song, everything, the story is better, you know, little baby and this and that and the stars and the whatever their story is. And they have a great story. We lose in the winter, but in the springtime, I'm sending Passover up against everything, against everything that is not Jewish.
It's good. It's
greatest religious meal in the world.
Right. Well, Marc, thank you for sharing your memories this morning.
Thanks.
And let's wish everybody a happy, healthy Pesach.
Aziz and Pesach to you all, a sweet
Amen.
Passover.
Take care.